What's up, everybody? Welcome in to a finally wearing our own merchandise edition of SSPN, Ethan.
Yes, sir. You look really dapper in that shirt and hat, Jude.
Thank you. I have to say the same. They may not be able to see it, Ethan. They might be able to see a little bit of mine, but Ethan's got the sweatshirt on. I got a long sleeve t shirt. He got a rope hat. I got a trucker hat, as you can see. So we'll try to rep this more often. And there's some when you're getting your own merch out there for the first time, Ethan, it may not be the I'm not saying it's not high quality, but it's not like Gucci or Prada or anything. But at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm pretty satisfied with this shirt and this hat here, Ethan. This is a nice Fruit of the Loom shirt. I think
Mm.
that's Gildan is your sweatshirt. And I still like the hat. I like the quality of it and everything. So I was very satisfied with it. I was happy with it.
Likewise, I'm honestly a bad person to ask about hats. I don't wear hats that often. I don't know what's a good hat, what's a bad hat, but it fits on my head and it has our logo on it, which makes it a great hat in my book.
There you go. That's all you gotta say there, Ethan. But today, Ethan, we are 50 games into the season officially.
Mm.
Um, and technically that's 9 games past the midway point of the season. But with our schedules, the Spurs schedules, and having a Monday off, because we've had a couple Mondays in a row, I believe we've had a game. Even if not just with the spacing in between games, this is the biggest gap we've had, obviously, because the Rodeo Road Trip is coming up, and we'll
Yep.
get to that later in the episode too. But this was a great point, kind of in a little bit of a stopping point, a little bit after halfway through the season, that we could go through the roster, kind of evaluate our guys, give our thoughts on some positives, some negatives, and kind of project, the rest of the season, but also kind of the future whenever it comes to a lot of these young guys' development.
Absolutely.
Heck yeah, I want to appreciate some of y'all in the comments here. We've got Aaliyah. She says, I was finally on time to watch a live stream, actually live. I appreciate your thoughts on the Spurs. Great work, gentlemen. We
Thank
appreciate that. And then blah, blah, blah. He's always in the comments giving his takes on things. So we appreciate that. He says, all I wish for the second part of the year is more minutes for Barlow and Wesley, and then less minutes to Zach and Doug. So we'll get into all of that, Ethan. And I figured we could just kind of start with the starting lineup, kind of just start with point guard and then go through it. And then we'll do the same thing with the bench rotation. So you ready to start off with Tre Jones?
I'm ready. You want me to go first or do you want to take him?
Well, here, we're going to bring this up, and I am going to bring up his stats real quick, just so we can have a little bit
Mm.
of a different look here. And have something to go off of. So here is Tre Jones, obviously was coming off the bench to start the season, and we saw how that went. And then after we made the lineup change, moved him back into the starting lineup, moved Jeremy to the 4, I think both of those guys' games definitely improved. But I'll dish it to you to start, Ethan. Just obviously there was the beginning of the season, which is why I threw in that note. But then at the same time, we've seen a lot of positives from him kind of since he's been moved back to the starting lineup. So
Yeah.
if you want to jump into strengths first, or
Yeah.
weaknesses, or just all of it, you give your thoughts on Tre so far.
I think he's had a great start to the season. Strengths, our best playmaker, our really only true natural point guard. Plays very well next to Wembanyama, was probably the first guy to throw him consistent lobs. I think that's becoming contagious with the rest of the team, Devin Vassell primarily, but he's really like the root in that area of the court. And then just he's able to make the right play always, whether that be taking an open floater or taking it all the way to the basket, pushing the pace and getting easy layups in transition. He really is minimal when it comes to mistakes. And in terms of weaknesses, I mean, he struggled a little bit at the very beginning of the year coming off the bench. We've talked about that at length because he was really the only ball handler in that bench unit to start the season. And Malachi Branham did not start as hot as we had hoped he would. So a lot of that responsibility was on Tre. So every statistical category kind of took a little bit of a dip for him. But we've seen all of that turn around once he was inserted into the starting lineup with the big guns. And then, of course, just 3-point shooting. It's been on an upward tick. He's at 28.4% on the season so far. I think that's improved since moving into the starting lineup as well. but still not a great percentage. You'd hope that your starting point guard could hit at least mid 30s, so that obviously needs to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously echo a lot of what you said, but just to give my thoughts, facilitation, like you said, he's our best playmaker. He sets guys up the best. I feel like one of the strengths of this team, just in our youthfulness, is our transition game.
Yeah.
And when he is at the head of the table playing that point guard position, kind of as the chess master, if you will, in transition, he is by far the best architect, I guess you could say, if that word usage makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, he gets guys in their run lanes. He's able to find guys. We've obviously seen, like you mentioned at the beginning, the emphasis that he has put on Wemby. Him getting the ball to Wemby came most naturally to him. And I
Mm.
think once we moved him into the starting lineup, we've seen that kind of trickle down to the rest of the team. You've seen other guys emphasizing it more, kind of since he's really taken the reins in that starting position. When it comes to his weaknesses, I don't know if necessarily they're ever going to. I don't know, how do I put this? I hate to say it this way. I don't know if these things are necessarily. I don't know if they're already capped or if maybe he can improve on them. But sometimes defensively against, there's just a certain, Trey has a certain ceiling, and he's not going to be able to go one on one in isolation against most all star guards. Those guys are going to get him. That's not to say that he's not a serviceable player or a valuable player on this team or still a very solid NBA player. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look at his brother, who's all of those things as well, he's somebody who also gets taken advantage of, against all star guards. There's other all star guards who aren't the greatest defensively who also get taken advantage of. But if you do have to point out weaknesses, that would be one thing. Really, defense and shooting are the things that stand out to me whenever it comes to things that Trey can improve on moving forward in his career.
Mm.
But the other thing that I would say that just kind of happens from time to time that kind of goes in hand with his playmaking, I would say, is sometimes there'll just be errant passes. I don't know if it's maybe sometimes it's not even completely his fault. And this was definitely much more prevalent when he was on the bench, but I still see it from time to time. There'll just be a turnover here and there. But as much as I'm criticizing that, Ethan, as I'm talking about it, um, every even all-star level players do that from time to time. So really, the more I'm thinking about it when I'm mentioning the turnover here and there, um, that was really something that stood out more on the bench than the starting unit. But yeah, obviously his facilitation, I would say his finishing ability at the rim, not necessarily in his floaters, but I've seen a lot of layups through contact or just, highly contested layups at the rim where he's been able to contort himself and use the acrobat badge, if you will, to get around guys and finish at the rim. And I mean, really, it's kind of when I think about the rest of his offensive game, like kind of in the mid range, it's really the same story that we've been talking about for a couple years here, Ethan. Just consistency on the floater is the only thing that I would criticize, but still, um, overall, I would say a very solid season for Trey. And if we didn't have him on the roster, um, we're 10-40 right now. We might be closer down to the Pistons if we didn't have him on the team this year, Ethan, whenever it comes to wins.
Yeah. I mean, for real, off the bench, just to that stats were basically 8 points per game, 5 assists, and a 1.5 turnovers. But as a starter, he's averaging basically 13, 7, and only one turnover a game. Um, so everything, and then 37% from three as a starter, which I did not realize. So limited sample size, obviously, but in 16 games, that's pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. And just to touch on some of the comments that are in here, Aaliyah says, "Where do I get that hat?" Well, here is a QR code. If you want to check out some of our merch, you can scan the QR code on your phone to support the show, but you can also go to the link in our bio and the description below of today's episode to go to our spread shop and get whatever gear you would like. We appreciate it. It is not a must, but if you would like to and feel compelled, we would
Mm,
greatly appreciate it. But also, she says that Tre Jones is super important to this team. We a whole mess without him, lol. That's
true.
definitely what we saw earlier in the season. And then blah, blah, blah says Trey's best improvement has been his ability to do less. he often went for bad shots before, like floaters, but now he does less and takes shots at the rim or wide open threes and focuses on passing. And I think that kind of ties into another theme that we've been talking about since the lineup change, Ethan. And
Mhm.
that's that when Tre has more, talent around him,
Yeah.
that just helps his game so much more. He's able to facilitate more. He's not passing off to Malachi, who sometimes doesn't know when to cut, or maybe isn't as connected. That's another term there, Ethan, that we've talked about throughout this season. That the starting lineup feels a lot more connected
Yeah.
with Tre in there, and he definitely has. What's the word? He is not forced things as much as maybe you could say he had to try to do on the bench.
Mm. And you could honestly say he's been the catalyst for everyone else figuring each other out too. Like him just being there has allowed Devin and Keldon, Jeremy, and Wemby to kind of grow into themselves and playing with each other as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that wraps up my thoughts on Tre Jones, Ethan.
Who knew Tre Jones would have such a long midseason breakdown? It took like 10 minutes, but he's been
There
a
you
very
go. And that's the other thing. I mean, man, we're gonna we're gonna try to get through this as fast as possible. But a lot of these guys, I'm thinking about it. That took 10 minutes.
Mhm.
We'll see how long the rest of these take. But let's move on to the man who is right next to him, Ethan, and that is Devin Vassell. One of our leading scorers on the team. He's been our leading scorer in our past 5 games, as you can see here. Um, and is up, just not a giant increase from last year when you look at him statistically, Ethan.
Mhm.
But the other thing that is key is, well, his overall field goal percentage has gone up. You could say the 2% decrease for 3-point shooting, but um, the the key here is that now he's having to play next to Victor Wembanyama, as well as having to play with Jeremy Sochan, and all of these guys really in this type of role, um, if that makes sense. Because last year, that would have been his first time kind of being like one of the main shot takers on the team. Um, and obviously, he only played 38 games because of the knee injury last season and the procedure that he had done on it. Um, but yeah, I'm sorry, I thought I had the stats up here already. Realized that when I got back. Um, but I'll just dish it to you, Ethan, to start on Devin's season so far.
I really think it's been overwhelmingly positive. Last year, you mentioned he kind of had a weird season. He only played, what, 40 something odd games in and out of the lineup, in and out of the starting rotation with a mismatch of different starters next to him. So this year, he's actually played 45 games this far into the year, um, getting used to playing with Victor, getting used to playing with Jeremy, like you said. But stats down a little bit, but strengths continue to be strengths for Devin. He's a walking bucket. He's a three-point sniper. On occasion, can get hot and cold. I think early in the season he was a little cold, but recently he's been really cooking from beyond the arc. So he's kind of finding his rhythm and finding his confidence. Something that he continually talks about in post-game conferences is just finding his confidence and being confident in himself to take big shots. I know people were upset about his last second shot and maybe he could have passed it to Wemby, but that's a tough pass, and you kind of want your shooting guard to be in those situations. The guy taking some shots like that, it's up for debate. It's up for debate. I'm fine with him taking the shot. His confidence is up. I think his strength finishing at the rim has improved. I think he's trying to actively get himself to the line, and facilitating wise, it was a struggle early, but he's finally finding a chemistry with Victor Wembanyama, making some great passes to him. Their pick and roll game has been very deadly, whether it be him with the as the ball handler or him as the pick setter. They've kind of developed a two-man game the past couple of weeks that's been very exciting to watch. And then defensively, he's arguably one of our best perimeter defenders, and it may be Jeremy, but it's him, Jeremy, and Vic as our three best perimeter defenders. So that's obviously a strength for his, something that he came into the draft as a strength. Now, things he can improve on, I would say just consistency, continuing to improve as a playmaker and as ball handler. Um, and just continuing to be aggressive, finishing strong at the rim. He still, on occasion, will miss some easy bunnies. So if he can continue to get in the gym, get stronger, and develop his chemistry with everybody, Who knows what the limit is for Devin Vassell?
Yeah, and when I was touching on the stats, you could say being down a little bit, even though they're basically practically identical. The whole
Yeah,
reason that I brought that up was I may have not articulated it the best, was not only are you adding Victor, but as you can see, he's already played, if I can do some quick maths, he's already played 7 more games than he did last season. Um, so when you factor in, and a lot of times when he came in and played last year, Keldon was out or Jeremy was out. So this is really the first time playing with everybody. So I think when you factor in, you add Victor, that's going to take shots away from him, obviously. When last year, really, he was probably the number one shot taker on the team when he played. Um, and then on top of that, he's also really playing, in this type of role with guys like Keldon, Jeremy, and Tre for the first time really throughout this season. Um, but when it comes to my takes on Devin, Ethan, obviously, and I'll probably say this for every single time we do this, just because we do have similar thoughts. I echo a lot of the stuff that you said. Man, really, to me, it just comes down to consistency for Devin right now. I mean, I'm not really. I feel like Devin's play style is very applicable and can fit into a lot of different styles, and I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here, Ethan, but down the line, if we do have to make personnel changes, which I think is going to be inevitable, I don't think every single rookie that we draft is going to be, on the team, when we're making a playoff race. You know what I mean? Obviously, that's far in advance. So there's, I'm talking like 3-4 years out right now. Um, I'm losing my train of thought, Ethan. Remind me where I was at.
saying some guys are inevitably going to be gone, but Devin's play style is so versatile.
Yes. Thank you. I was just saying, moving forward, he's going to be somebody that I think is going to be able to fit into whatever we decide to do in how we build around Wemby. So you could say the 3-point percentage is down a little bit, but then you could also say that the overall field goal percentage is also up by the same amount. So that really offsets itself. I think we've been able to see, he's become. Not only did we see it wasn't even really flashes of it because we still got to see it for 38 games. We, through the 45 games that we've seen so far, Ethan, it's confirmed that he is somebody who can go get a bucket off the dribble. He's somebody, arguably right now, I know Wemby can do incredible things, but just as of right now, when it comes to polishedness, Ethan, I think he's probably our best isolation scorer.
Yes.
And on top of that, he's somebody who can play on or off the ball, and he's improving as a defender.
Yeah.
Um, but really, what it comes down to for me, Ethan, as you can see, up to a steal a game. He's had a steal a game technically the past couple years, but um, really, it just comes down to consistency for me with him moving forward offensively and defensively. Um, Whenever it comes to him improving.
I think my comparison for him when we had drafted him, Jude, was Chris Middleton. Now that we have Victor Wembanyama, who is often compared to Giannis Antetokounmpo, I think that comp for him and his play style next to Wemby, that's really becoming. I'm kind of a prophet. That's becoming very, very true right before our very eyes. So,
That's a really good comparison, Ethan. There, I think you deserve a head pat, and also the 2-man game that you mentioned. You're seeing that develop so much with him and Wemby, and like you mentioned, him as a screener. That was something that I really kind of brought up. I've seen him even do that with other guys.
yep.
So just the fact that he's finding other ways to impact the game, even if it's just little things here or there. Those are things that you got to be happy about. Now, the other thing I just want to, as we're right here, Ethan, because we're talking very good about Tre, and now we're talking good about Devin. We do acknowledge we're 10-40,
Yeah,
but the other thing that we acknowledge with that is that the league, for one. I mean, I feel like the bottom of the league, there's like the biggest gap between the bottom of teams and then, the maybe 15, 16 win teams. I guess, well, that's like Portland is who I'm thinking of. You get what I'm saying. There
yeah,
is this year, I don't know how to necessarily put it into words, but what I'm trying to say is the gap between the bottom of the league and then the play-in teams, it feels like is the biggest that we've seen since the play-in has been around.
for sure. I mean, the league is extremely competitive right now. Probably the top 12 seeds, both conferences have a right to be in the play-in tournament, and
Yeah.
that's. I mean, honestly, playoffs. Like, there's some play-in teams that are like, I thought that they would be guaranteed playoff spots, but it's just It's cutthroat out there, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where the Kings are at right now, but they're a team that was like top 3 in the league last year, and they're not even having necessarily a bad season. It's just like you've seen the Thunder take jumps, you've seen you've seen the Rockets take jumps.
The King
Yeah, so they're at 5 right now. I remember earlier they were at 7, so that's good for them, but still, like, that's an example of a team just falling off a little bit, and they didn't even really lose anything, if I'm remembering, uh,
yeah.
everything correctly. But the whole reason I bring that up is we're just looking at this from a development perspective. We understand that the Spurs are on the struggle bus when it comes to the win-loss record in the NBA. So if we're sitting here talking about, oh, these are some good things that we've seen from these guys, we really feel like it's development's on the right track. We're not saying that necessarily translates to winning in the current moment. We're looking at this from a very long-term perspective. Devin Vassell just signed a 5-year extension. What are the things we're seeing right now, and how are they translatable, and how can they be developed over the next 5 years? And so he can become an all-star level player, really. I mean, because that's the type of contract that we gave him. He's already at 18 points. He's at least going to be a 20 point per game scorer, or
Mhm.
close to it, I feel like, for the rest of his career.
For sure. And for the delusional fans out there that want some hate in our show, the biggest negative that we probably won't address because this is a player by player breakdown is that the Spurs are a young team with zero chemistry offensively or defensively, and that's why we've only won 10 games. But why is that, Jude? We're the youngest team in the league, even still. And if you want to say OKC is also young, just look at their history the past couple
Look
years,
at the
how
context.
they have a MVP candidate in Shea Gilgeous who's been there for several years. Like, do some homework before you throw that stat out there. We're really just getting into this rebuild thing.
Yeah, last year the Thunder were in the play-in, and the past 2 seasons prior, they had less than 30 wins and at least 50 losses. We're kind of in year 1 of that right now. I know last year we were 22 and 60, but that was in order to get the centerpiece that is Victor. And obviously, you can go back to the beginning of the season, and myself and you thought we were going to be a lot better than we were right now. But we've also been humbled by a lot of the stuff that we mentioned earlier with the way that the league is this year, but also just some reminders of what it's like when you bring in a generational talent, the NBA rebuilding process. And then two, I mean, this goes into Victor, which we'll get into later, but Pop mentioned this recently. Like, Victor's also, not only are we adjusting to playing with Victor, but then Victor's adjusting to playing the schedule. And then on top of that, like we already mentioned earlier with Devin, he only played 38 games with the guys last year. And then even when Keldon played, there were some Jeremy injuries. We don't need to rehash all of that. But we have
Mhm.
been reminded that really this year is year 1 with these guys for a multitude of reasons.
Well said, Mr. Jude. Well said.
Just to get to some comments here before we end, blah, blah, blah says, I do want to see Devin improve on defense more. That's an area where I feel like he can take a leap as he has the physical skills. I agree there, for sure. And then just to address this too, blah, blah, blah says, I'm not saying Devin shouldn't have passed, but if you know Devin, he wants that shot too. And he played a great game. He could have hit that shot.
Sure.
Alejandro Morales says, last shot was a tough call. It needed to be a touch pass. The second the defender turned around, the pass would have been picked or deflected, and he believes that the shot was the best outcome. There was a lot of noise out there, man, on Twitter from people who are very well respected in the Spurs community, and it
Mm.
really kind of surprised me, man.
That's a tough pass. Even if he
Bro,
makes that pass, that is a very difficult entry pass. Moving left, you got 2 defenders on your face and a help defender coming from the corner. Maybe Wemby can make a miraculous lob catch, but that's a really tough pass with your momentum going the opposite direction, right? Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Devin had 28.
Yeah, that is also true. And it's a
He's our
good
best. He's our best 3-point shooter right now, too. Like, I'm not saying he's the best player on the team, but
it's
like as of right now, he's the best 3-point shooter on the team, and he had the hot hand in the game. And it's like, in the grand scheme of things, it's a great thing that we competed with maybe not a great. You don't want to great for a loss. But in the context of this season, competing with the Pelicans is pretty good, man. Now that if you want to criticize the Cleveland performance on Saturday, I'm all ears. I get that. That was ugly. But the New Orleans game, like, yes, that's a tough shot. You want to win the game. And when you have a 7'4" generational star, like, I understand where people are coming from, but I don't think that Devin is a selfish Wemby hater because
No,
he took that shot. I think he wears 24 and Kobe is his idol for a reason. And he basically had 30 and he had a three to win the game. So he took it. And then he said he would take it every time because he's that type of player. Like, I don't know why people are mad about that. But I guess if every player at every moment doesn't say that Wemby is the best and they need to pass to him at every moment, Ethan, it's a problem with some people.
it's ridiculous, dude. I mean, how many great generational centers get last shots? Like, that's also just like a point. Like, if I'm fine with Wemby shooting the last shot, but give him the rock. Like, don't. Never mind. Never mind.
A lot of the stuff that y'all already said in the comments, we agree with as well. And just want to get to some other comments here. Nick was in here. He's a SSPN OG. He says, been keeping up with y'all on Spotify when I can't catch the lives. We truly appreciate that, Nick. And then DA Gaming says we could easily be 20 plus win right now if we knew how to win close games. Very young players. I mean, think of all the single digit games that we've lost. I mean, the ones that come to my mind just right off rip. I mean, really, you could even include the Orlando game a little bit if you wanted to recently, with the way that we kind of, if you want to say, fumbled the end of that comeback there. But the Bucks, the previous Cavs game, and then obviously the Pelicans games are just recent ones that come to mind. And I'm forgetting others that have also happened this season. We have lost a lot of late games in crunch time, and
Wizards.
that's because it's the first time this group is going through that experience, Ethan.
Yeah.
What a crazy thought.
Some people just don't have very many thoughts, Jude.
We will try not to subtweet on this pod. I don't know. You get what I'm saying. Subtweet anymore too much. Everybody's entitled to their opinions, but there are just some, Ethan, that I see that frustrate me. But it's all good. It's a part of the gig. Any final thoughts on Devin before we move on?
Robin. He's the Robin.
Yes. And also, I'm so glad we signed him to that extension. He's 23 years old right now, Ethan. I think he'll be 24 when that contract kicks in. We're going to have him from when he's 24 to 29. Think about that.
Perfect.
Great locked up contract there. Now I'm trying to get to the rest of the roster. Forgetting where I'm at here. We will go to number 3 in the starting lineup, Ethan, who plays the 3. And I was about to do Keldon, but then I remembered, not that I forgot Champagnie was starting, but just kind of when we talk about the future of the team and guys who have big roles, that's kind of just who I think of, and that's where he started to begin the season. But we got to go with Julian because he's been in the starting lineup at the 3, Ethan. I don't think this breakdown will be 10 minutes.
No, I don't think so either. Would you like to go first, or shall I?
You can go for it.
I think the comparison of Julian Champagnie to specifically 2012, for all the haters out there, 2012, Danny Green is very accurate. Just a guy who can fill the need and space the floor and play solid defense in that starting lineup and allow a better scorer like Keldon Johnson to come off the bench and be a spark plug. He makes minimal mistakes. He's shooting 37% from 3 as a starter. Averaging 7 points a game, and can play solid defense. We've seen him play solid defense against good players before, like Jason Tatum in the Boston Celtics game. Of course, Jason Tatum's an all-star, blah, blah, blah. But even still, things he can improve on. Ball handling, confidence, just minimizing mistakes even more so. But I think just being able to put the ball on the floor and make a play for someone else would make him a lot better of a player.
Yeah, I don't really. I wish I had more to break down on Julian, but Julian really has been. He's been great for us in the lineup change, in moving Keldon back down to the bench. He's been huge in just being a floor spacer and making the offense between the starters less jumbled.
Yes.
Obviously, he's not going to do too much. He's not a star or anything, but that's kind of the point of having him out there. And that's what opens up the offense, as I just alluded to. Um, his spacing, um, as well as his defensive effort. I'm not going to say that it's perfect, but he's always giving effort, and we have seen some steals and stuff like that from him at times this game, this season.
Mhm.
There are individual possessions, Ethan, where I see him make great defensive plays. There are also individual possessions where I see him get beat off the dribble. So Julian, I mean, this is another thing. Let's remind ourselves here, Ethan. As I'm sitting here thinking about Julian Champagnie, I'm like thinking of being highly critical and stuff. He's another 22-year-old in his first true season as a rookie.
Yep.
After we got him from the Delaware Bluecoats last season with Charles Bassey. Um, but yeah, I mean, he's very similar to Danny Green. There will be games where there was one game where he hit I think it was the Atlanta game when we lost and had a huge comeback. He like went 0 for 3 in the first half or something around there. Maybe he didn't even take a shot. And then exactly, you have the 5 up because he hit 5 threes in the third quarter. And that's kind of what you see from Champagnie. It's like he's either on fire or you wonder where he is. And that's why we made the Danny Green comparison. But I will say, for the most part, overall, even when his shot's not hitting, he's not doing anything detrimental to the team. You know
No.
what I mean?
He's one less mouth to feed. And here's my favorite Champagnie stat. When he gets 3+ days of rest coming into that next game, he's shooting 46% from three. So he's about to go off on Wednesday, is what I'm hearing, Jude.
Where'd you get that from?
ESPN. I'm looking at his splits. They have so many,
Oh, there you go.
know.
That's
So,
so funny. There you go. Hey, that's a preview. That's a preview. We're in the middle of a break here.
but he also shoots 12% from three on Wednesdays. So
Oh, dang it. That's our next game.
he's at 3+
I,
days of
I
rest.
like these stats that you're bringing up here. That's great.
Thanks, thanks. But he shoots 50% from three on Thursdays. Okay, that's enough of those. That's enough.
Okay. Any final thoughts on Julian?
No, man, consistency and then dribbling the basketball is all I ask.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add, I'll talk about his contract too. Another dude on a 4 year, 2.5 mil contract a year. So I mean, very very a high value contract for the Spurs is what I would say.
Agreed. Agreed.
Alrighty, and that brings us to a man who was not playing this position to start the season, but he is now back to the fore. And that is 20-year-old Jeremy Sochan, Ethan. And the reason that I start with 20-year-old is because there was something that I sent you recently, and I realized it when I was looking at my fantasy team roster. And that was the fact that Jeremy Sochan, as of right now, is actually younger than the number 3 pick in last year's draft, Brandon Miller.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and I don't know if he's older than Wemby. I think he's older than Scoot too. But that was just something when I heard that or when I saw that, that like also reminded me of just, I mean, Jeremy's youth, because that's pretty crazy to think about that he's younger than Brandon Miller, and then on top of that, he's already played a season as well. He's a sophomore.
Yeah. Do you want me to go ahead and jump right into it from
Yes,
there?
sir.
All right. So that's a really interesting point because we often forget his age. So I'm glad that you sent me that stat there. He's only 20 years old. And what was he, the ninth overall pick or the 11th?
Ninth.
Ninth overall pick. So we expect the world from a lottery pick, right? It's just natural. But when we drafted him, he was extremely raw. Like he really was just a really solid, versatile, strong defender with solid point guard skills, I guess, like as a playmaker, but really nothing else. Like just use his athleticism to score easy baskets. So for Jeremy Sohan to now average 11 points per game and about 6 or 7 rebounds, 4 assists, start the season as a point guard. Um, to me, he's really had a strong season. If you really look away from the fact that he was thrust into a difficult position at point guard, made some mistakes, had some really tough moments, had some great moments too. Um, but he's been a terrific scorer for us, especially at the power forward position. He's a great cutter. He's great in open space. He's improved tremendously as a three-point shooter. What's his exact stat? 35% from three this season. That's great. I'll take that.
You
And
see
he's
the jump right there, Ethan? Sorry to interrupt you.
you're good. What was the exact jump?
We'll just look. It's right in front. Do you have it on the screen or you have a different one up?
But it's really small because I'm on a
No,
laptop.
you're good. You're good. It's 24.6%, and now he's up to 35%, and he's also taking a half a three more a game. So he's taking more threes, and his percentage has jumped up by almost 11 points or 11%.
Yeah, I mean, his free throw percentage goes from 69 to 77. Basically shooting the same from the field. But I think you can see improvements as a ball handler. I think you can see improvements in his footwork in the post. And he's gradually improved in his chemistry with Victor Wembanyama. I think they have a really nice two-man game. And there's a definite difference in his just the look of his body and his strength. If you look at him last year, he was still pretty skinny. But this year he's put on some muscle. So I've been very pleased with Jeremy Sohan's performance thus far, and things to improve on. I mean, they're kind of the same things. I mean, just continue to get better as a ball handler, continue to widen your bag in terms of being a scorer, work on consistency in the low block, and as a shooter, just continue to work on that stuff. Um, and I mean, that's pretty much it. Continue chemistry, but that's pretty much everybody, right? Chemistry.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think of Jeremy, obviously you think about the beginning of the season, of course, and I was really optimistic on that. I thought there was some potential there for sure. I
Mhm.
think we learned as we saw the beginning of the season that that is not necessarily Jeremy's best spot. But I think with the playmaking flashes that we saw last year, as much as a bunch of people are going to disagree with this, um, I'm not mad at it. I get why they threw it out there. Let's see if we can start him. Obviously, at that point, we were still thinking that Wemby was going to play the five, or excuse me, the four as well. Um, and at that point we kind of felt like we've learned that Wemby one can play physically with a lot of the centers that I mean at the same time Joel Embiid still did what Joel Embiid did. And that was kind of what I was thinking about going into the season that I talked about in that Sixers post game as well as some of kind of my concerns. But at the same time, I mean, we've seen him block Giannis. We've seen him go toe to toe with AD. And not to get too much into Victor here because I know we're about to. But that was kind of that's what we learned with the part of the with the front court. And then we also learned, obviously, with how we saw the beginning of the season go with Jeremy, that while he does have a lot of playmaking skills, and we still see him out there sometimes taking the ball up the floor with Tre Jones on the court in this starting lineup, Ethan. Now, obviously, that's usually on a fast break, where Jeremy gets the rebound and then just pushes it up the floor. But I don't think that he's as good at that. And I don't think that his playmaking, like you see,
Mhm.
up almost two assists here. Well, no, not two assists. It's like 1.2. But still, almost from 2.5 to almost 4 assists. I don't think some of that has to do with the beginning of the season and him just playing point guard. But I also think that his dribble got tighter. His vision is better. And regardless of how ugly it looked and overall for the team, whether it was a good thing or not, which we obviously realized it was a negative, whenever it came to trying to get wins and just having progression and looking competent on offense, I still think that him playing that point guard role at the beginning of the season did positive things for his career. And I know a lot of people may call that crazy and think that that's stupid, but that's just my personal opinion. We're looking at the little things here for development wise, long term. And while there were a lot of struggles in that, I think there's going to be a lot of mental fortitude that he gained from that for the rest of his career. And we still see that, from time to time that he has his struggles there. But once again, he's 20 years old. He's younger than the number 3 pick from last year's draft, for example, right? Um, and like I said, I think there were a lot of positives that came out of that for sure. And then when it just comes to this season and the things that we've seen him do well, I think since we've made that lineup change, his offense has opened up a lot. I think a lot of that has to do with Keldon being on the bench now as well, because both of them were kind of cutting to the rim now that Champagnie's in the starting lineup and there's less mouths to feed, like you mentioned. We see a lot of the things that we saw from him offensively last year. We've been seeing those since he's been moved into the starting lineup. I love his chemistry in the front court, or not necessarily chemistry. They're still working on that. But I love the front court pairing of him and Victor together moving forward defensively. The other thing that has continued to happen this year since we've taken him out of the point guard position, guess what he still does, Ethan? He still guards the primary ball handler. And while there are times where he does get got because he's 20-year-old Jeremy Sochan, there are a lot of times where you will see him force people to pass off. And really having him guard the primary ball handler in a lot of these situations is huge for us, because if we go back to Tre, which we were talking about earlier, that is one of his deficiencies, is sometimes he can just, I hate to say this, I'd get cooked too. Let me say that. I get cooked a lot worse than Tre would. But sometimes Tre does just get cooked by some of these all-star guards. So having Jeremy out there and being able to slow those guys down and take the load off of Tre defensively, when it comes to guarding, really good perimeter players, that's just an example of Jeremy's versatility. And then when it comes to improvements, even with, and we're being nitpicky here, even with the giant increase in shooting, which we love to see, you still see some some air balls here and there and stuff like that. But with the improvement that I've seen, I have no doubt in my mind that he will continue to get better at that. But just to talk about things that he can improve on, and then kind of like I hinted at a little bit earlier, with as much as I think that the point guard experiment is going to help him mentally in the long run, I think right now as a 20-year-old, sometimes Jeremy will just get a little bit too much in his own head. And that's why, you'll see some of those games that I mentioned in some of our past recent streams, Ethan, where you just have 2 points. I think we saw another one pretty recently, in either the Pelicans or the Cavs game. I can't remember exactly. And then there were some there. And I think sometimes when he gets off to a rough start, he's not able to bounce back. Like he started 0 for 5 in that most recent game where he had 2 points, where if he starts out strong, you might see him go for 31 and 13 like he did against the Trailblazers fairly recently. But once again, really, when you think about this, Ethan, if we're going to dumb it down, for lack of a better term, it's the inconsistency of a 20-year-old NBA player. But there's a lot of positive things that we've seen from Jeremy, especially since we've moved him in to the starting lineup.
Well said. Well said. But you know what's crazy? Last point on Jeremy. I'm looking
No,
at
go
his
ahead.
monthly stats, and I want to look at November and then January, because November he was ingrained as that point guard. In
Mm-hmm.
January, we had already transitioned him over to power forward at that point. So in November, he averaged 12, 5, and 4, shooting 47% from the field, 46% from three, 85% from the free throw line, with 2.5 turnovers a game. Now let's move him over to power forward, middle of January. He played 2 more games, keep that in mind, but averaged 13, so only 1 more point, 7 rebounds, that's about 2 more rebounds, 3 assists, 1 less assist, on 46% from the field, 37% from three, so actually a worse 3-point percentage, and 85% again from free throw lines. It's the same percentage from there. So statistically, he's pretty much the same player, which is a different role.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone that was said he was a crappy player then and is now suddenly saying he's a great player now, he's the same player. It's just a positional change. So
Yeah.
kind
No,
of
that's
funny.
facts. You couldn't have said it better myself. And I remembered some other stuff I wanted to talk about before we move on, and I'll get to some comments here because we have those as well. But sometimes it's not as much. We saw it much more when he was starting. But still, sometimes he'll drive to the low block, and then he'll be on his pivot foot, and he'll just stop and like not know what to do. And sometimes it turns into a turnaround jumper or a nice little, a pump fake and then an up and under layup or something like that. But that is one thing that I continue to see, just every once in a while. But that's another thing where I feel like a lot of this is just like IQ stuff, that it's just going to take some time to get all of this down. Like when we mentioned the Thunder earlier and what they had to go through over the past 3 seasons to get to where they're at now. I think it's just going to take some time and some maturity and just being of like a legal drinking age in the United States. Like, I threw that in because I remember there was the story about him asking Pop for some wine because over in Europe and in England, I think he was already able to have some.
Yeah.
But the whole reason I bring that up is he's still 20 years old. So like some of these things, they're just going to come with youth, if that makes sense. But, that, like I said, there are all these little things that we could criticize about Jeremy, but really overall, in the grand scheme of things, he's a super solid contributor. We've been seeing his rebounding the past couple games, Ethan. And the last thing that I'll mention, this is another thing that ties into Devin. Look, I mean, he only played 56 games last year. He's already at 50. It's been consistent throughout the season. I'm going to be interested at the end of the year, Ethan, to see like the full differences,
Yeah.
Statistically. Not that that's the end all be all, because the eye test matters a lot. And the other thing that's key about these stats too is this is with adding Victor. So that's the other thing you've got to keep in mind with a lot of these as well. But really, Ethan, coming into the year, probably the things that we wanted to see the most from Jeremy were improvements in his playmaking, his ball handling, and then his shooting. And I
Mm.
think we've seen those so far.
And lastly, just to be funny,
No, go ahead.
3+ days rest, he's averaging 17 points a game on 55% from 3.
We need all of these, Ethan, because they apply to this next game coming up. But what's the stats on Wednesdays? That's the real question.
11 points a game on 32
Mm.
3. So a rough Wednesday.
Man, all of these rest days are getting offset by the Wednesday stat.
Maybe he'll just play normal then.
Okay, getting into some of the other comments here. Nick says, love what Jeremy has been doing. He's expanded upon his short mid-range creation game he started to develop toward the end of last season, and obviously the low volume shooting improvement is great. General Eli says, the only real complaint for Jeremy outside of inconsistency is I wish he would be more assertive. There's times where he differs 5 feet away from the rim on a mismatch, LOL. And that's kind of what I was just alluding to with him stopping in the low block. It's like he'll run up there, like he's going to go make a play, which he does do, from time to time. But then he's like, oh, that's Walker Kessler or somebody, you know what I mean? And then he's like, I got to pass off. And then he's just like, kind of like looking for a pass and the rotations are a little bit off and stuff like that.
Yeah, he can sometimes get turnover happy when he does stuff like that.
But that has significantly decreased since moving to the 4.
For sure.
But yeah, any final thoughts on Jeremy?
No, sir. I think we covered it.
All right, now we get to the big Wembanyama enchilada. I think that's a name of a group chat I'm in. So before I take credit for that, let me give it to them. I'm here on the schedule. I'm trying to jump to the Rodeo Road Trip a little bit too fast here. But let's talk about the franchise centerpiece, the future of the league, the thing that is making this 10-40 season be okay, Ethan. And obviously there's a lot of other guys that we talked about some of the other improvements we've seen, but look at that. Is that Dwayne Johnson on like do you see this ad?
Yeah.
Okay, if y'all are on podcast form, there's like Dwayne Johnson and like a slug. I don't even know how to describe this. And now I'm seeing some of the other ads on here. We're gonna go ahead and scroll down here in a second and get to Victor's stats. But yeah, Ethan, besides the fun ads that we just got on the screen, give me your thoughts on Victor Wembanyama's season so far.
I mean, what can you say that's bad, honestly? He's the franchise. He's averaging 20 points, 10 boards, 3 assists, 3 blocks, and a steal, leading the league in blocks, shooting 46% from the field, only 30% from 3. But I think that's actually an improvement from what he was shooting in the French league.
Yes.
So he obviously was working on that in the gym. He might be getting a little bit better of shot looks as well. But he's been everything that's been advertised, Jude. He's an unbelievable scorer. He could score from 3 different locations, mid-range, post, whatever it is. He's got an unbelievable handle. Defensively, he might be the greatest defensive prospect that we've ever seen. Like, honestly, he might be the greatest prospect of all time, but just to temper it down to
right.
Defensively, he is unbelievable. I saw a stat the other day that he's already matched, if not exceeded, Rudy Gobert's block and steal totals from when he won his first DPOY as a rookie. So things he can improve on. Maybe a little bit tighter of a handle and just understanding his teammates a little bit better. And then that's kind of it. Get stronger. Uh, But But even then, he's doing pretty damn well. Like, other than Joel Embiid, no one's really gone and killed him. Like, you can't say that he's been weak.
And what was the cost now, looking back on it? Shout out to Joel. I kind of feel bad about him for that. Or
Yeah.
bad for him with the meniscus thing. That's real tough. I think there might be a chance he's still back, maybe for the playoffs. Um, Maybe I'm completely wrong on that. I've got some sort of notification that said I think that might be the case. But anyway, sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good. I mean, I'm honestly losing my train of thought because he does everything so well, and he's exactly what we hoped he would be at that number one pick, leading this team. And he's really gotten better as a playmaker as the season's progressed as well. He's made some unbelievable passes, both out of the post and off the dribble. In full court, he's a nightmare to stop. Just throw it up ahead. He's going to get a layup or a dunk on the other end. A lob threat, a physical presence, and just his will to win games. I know he's
Yeah.
only got 10, but he is so unbelievably competitive, and you can just see it oozing out of him. The exact personality that you want as the cornerstone of your franchise.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to any interviews about him and how, like, I mean, this kid's, well, now he's officially 20. Happy birthday, Wemby. I'm behind on that. I can't believe that. I think we may have already talked about that because I'm realizing that was in January. But when you listen to some of the stuff he says, it's like he's a philosopher or something. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. What I was about to say, I was going to say he's a 19-year-old, but now I see he's 20. But still, even when he was a 19-year-old, he's like going to bed at 9, like reading before bed. Like, that sounds like my mom. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like he's a OG. But he is very grounded. That
Mm,
that is that is how I would describe it whenever it comes to his personality. And then of course on the court, which is what we're here for, I don't really have too much to criticize or add because everything that I could say has already been said by myself and other people. So really, I mean, the way that he plays in the fourth quarter, how you see that turn up, that's something that I've really noticed this season. And then whenever it comes to like, things to improve on, the only thing I can really think of is his balance, and that kind of ties in with strength. Sometimes he'll maybe get a ball, kind of at the elbow or something, and try to dribble around somebody, and it'll just kind of like fall down a little bit, like a baby giraffe or gazelle or something.
mm,
um, and then the other thing that I would say is kind of what our man Gorilla says here. Sometimes he tries to thread the needle when the needle doesn't even exist. LOL. And I think that just kind of ties into the fact that he's the type of player he is, the generational prospect he is, his mentality, and also, the vision that he has at his height. Not everybody, can do the things that he does. And I think sometimes he tries to make plays that, other guys just aren't aren't even thinking of at the time, or aren't just able to do. But that's not necessarily his fault. He's just in his crazy uh generational body. And and he wants to win, and he tries to make plays. And
yeah.
I'm not going to fault him for that. This is rookie Victor Wembanyama. He's averaging 20 and 10. He's leading the league in blocks. My most conservative take of all time, Ethan, is me being like, well, I think he can get to 2 or 3 blocks, and like being like, I don't know if I just said something too crazy. Obviously, we're seeing it. If it's at 3 right now, Ethan, leading the league, I mean, imagine what it's going to be like in like 3 to 4 years, because we've already seen multiple 5 to 6 block games. And then, as you mentioned, also his playmaking over the past couple of games. And that kind of ties into the Devin thing as well. That
Yeah.
same game, yes, he only had 16, but that's because he also had 10 rebounds and 7 assists. His court vision at his height, like, I'm thinking about how that's going to progress long term. and it's just scary, man. I wish I had more. Like we could dive into the intricacies of Victor, and I could talk about he's driving to the rim, the lobs. I mean, I could talk about all of that, but you guys already know that. You see it every time you turn it on. There's a reason why the Spurs have more national TV games than they've had in like the past 3 seasons combined this year,
Yeah.
and it's because this dude is the main event attraction.
Well said, Jude. The savior.
Yeah, I wish I had more to add or dive into, but when it comes to him, there's just
I think obviously he's not going to win Defensive Player of the Year for many reasons. One, he's a rookie. He's on a losing team. Blah blah blah. Other guys are also deserving, but I think he deserves to be on an all-defensive team this year.
he was leading the league in blocks, dude.
It's a travesty. Like I'm trying to think honestly, who else? Who else? Center wise.
I mean, they're probably going to throw in Rudy.
Probably Rudy. Is he over JJJ? I think so.
Mm-hmm. I think so this year too.
Is
Yeah.
he over Anthony Davis? I think so.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. He's going to be on even if he's second team, I think he's going to be on a defensive team. Like you can't lead the league in blocks as a rookie and do what he's doing and not at least get on one of those.
Gorilla, take Chet's name out of your comment right now. Don't even put his name next to Rudy and AD. Come on now. Get out of here, Gorilla.
Chet is solid. I will give him some credit. Chet it's but I don't think that Chet is ahead of him when it comes to defensive team conversation. But I understand that he's in the conversation. That's where I'm trying to give Gorilla credit.
I'm trying to get Jude to get toxic one of these days. I'm trying to get
You can't do it. You can't do it. Anyways, okay, Nick, I put this comment up from Nick earlier because I think this is a good point. He says, I mean, sometimes the needle is there. His passing execution just isn't all the way there yet. And that ties in to kind of what we were talking about of him still being, as much as he is at a different place than a lot of these other guys we're talking about, still a 20-year-old rookie coming from the European game, having to adjust. And when some of those passes start hitting, I get what he's saying. Like when we get the chemistry down and some of those other guys learn him more, sometimes those full court passes that he has, like eventually in 2 to 3 years, they will start hitting and they're going to look incredible. So I don't want to completely dismiss that. And the last thing we got to mention on Wemby here, Ethan, dude, I mean, he's what, 44 games we saw, right? Let me pull this back up again. 44 games this season. That is more than he played all of last season, not just the regular season, but also the playoffs. So the fact that he's doing this, adjusting, and you hear that knock?
Yep, I'm also doing it.
Staying healthy throughout all this as well. That was another thing. I didn't think he was going to be playing the way that he's playing. Obviously, yeah, you've had a little bit of the minutes restriction. And when I say playing the way he's playing the amount of games he's playing. Yeah. That's what I meant to say. At the consistency he has, and now that he's playing back-to-backs too, I have been very happy with how he's been able to translate, from a very different schedule to the NBA on top of having summer league and preseason.
Yeah, we were both very conservative in our preseason prediction as to how many games he would play. I can't remember the exact number, but we both
50, 60 is what I said.
Yeah, I don't think we envisioned 44 at the All-Star break. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, he'll probably he'll get close to 70, I feel like, at least, barring any injuries. Like we already knocked on wood.
He's getting 65 plus because Victor Wembanyama, knock on wood, he wants that Rookie of the Year.
Oh, yeah.
He does.
Alrighty. Well, we'll try to get through these a little bit quicker, Ethan. There's somebody that we do have to talk about that I think is going to take some time just because he's a significant contributor to the team. And everybody else I think will be a little bit shorter, but that is, of course, Keldon Johnson, the new 6th man of the San Antonio Spurs over the past couple weeks. One of the older players on the team, one of the more experienced players on the team, one of the last remnants of the DeJounte DeRozan era, Ethan. Shout out to Keldon Johnson back in the day having to play the 4 in the bubble, just going ham, because that's how we were introduced to him. Obviously a very different role and a very different play style now. But give me your thoughts on Keldon so far this season, Ethan.
Man, I feel terribly terribly bad for Keldon Johnson. He came into the league as a shooting guard, played power forward. Last year, he was tasked with being the primary facilitator, scorer, ball handler, everything because everybody was hurt. So he averaged 22 a game. And this season, he was at first starting, then thrust into the bench in a completely new role, and is asked to play completely differently next to Victor Wembanyama, next to everybody who's finally not injured. So he's just had probably the biggest learning curve, start to finish, out of anybody on the team. Um, but doesn't complain. He's still getting 17 points a game, 6 rebounds, 3 assists on 45% shooting. He's a bowling ball. He's a guy that's a great cutter. He's going to finish strong at the rim every single time, no matter what. Um, he is a streaky shooter, but he still shoots 34% from three, and at times is known to get very, very hot. So you can't even say that's a negative. He has improved as a playmaker. He has really improved as a defender. I don't think we give him enough credit in that category. He's not perfect, but
Hmm.
previous, he was really just a guy that you could get around at any time. He
Yeah.
didn't need screens. This year, he is sitting in that chair and he is taking up the challenge. Now, he's not perfect because of his physical deficiencies. He's only 6'5", not super long, not the quickest lateral movement guy. But he is giving it 110% effort. So thank you, Keldon Johnson, for doing that and being the leader of the team that he has been this season. Weaknesses that you could still improve on. I mean, you could say defense. You could say making the extra pass at times. But for me, it's simply just having a mid-range game, finding a pull-up jump shot, adding something to his game that
Yeah.
makes him a little less two-dimensional. Because right now he's really just I'm barreling at the rim or I'm taking a three. And we've seen glimpses of it, but it's not a strength right now. If he improved on that, I think he would make the perfect six man.
You know what I'm kind of noticing here is we're pulling up the stats here too, Ethan. Obviously, last year, and still he only played 63 games last year. That's another thing I'm realizing as we're talking about this. I feel like a bad podcast host at the moment right now, Ethan, because that's something, when we've talked about Jeremy missing games, we talked about Devin missing games. I didn't realize that he missed 19 games last season too. But what I was going to bring up before that, Ethan, is that obviously, you can say they're a little bit decreased in some stats, like scoring specifically, but that's because the role is completely different this year, not just in what he was doing in the starting lineup and then the 6-man role later, but once again, as I've mentioned with all of these guys, with the obvious addition of Victor Wembanyama, and really, if you want to think about it, Devin Vassell as well, with him playing consistently this year. But look at his stats in the season before last year. And it's very similar to kind of what they are this season.
Mhm.
And that's because why? He was still playing off DeJounte and Derek in those years. I think we did have the DeRozan trade before that season, and then we moved Derek midseason and then DeJounte the offseason after. But the whole reason I bring that up, I mean, I think was Rudy Gay still on the team then, or had we moved him by then?
He was on the team.
See, he was playing kind of behind guys. I think Rudy might have been gone by then,
Yeah,
actually.
he might have been
Yeah,
on.
but Derek and Dejounte, regardless,
Yeah.
we're still there, and it's kind of very similar to that. Percentage has gone up a little bit. He also has been taking less threes as well. Um, has been taking less shots overall. Once again, that ties into Devin and Wemby. Um, but really, kind of when I look at Keldon this season, I think about the lineup switch, and I think that his offense has opened up a lot more since moving to the bench. But I think also everything that you hit on, I'd still like to see more. It kind of ties in to consistency, as we've mentioned with everybody. We'll kind of see that from we've seen a couple, single digit games from Keldon from time to time, and he is the highest paid player on the team right now. So you would like to see, at least, closer, at least around 20 points, per game whenever it comes to his role. But I also understand there's a lot of shots to go around. So maybe 16 is really a solid amount, for him being a 6-man. But also, like you said, his mid-range game and just not, adding 3 level scoring and having like a bag and something that you can go to in the mid-range game. Because like you said, it really is, it kind of does feel like with Keldon, he's either taking a wide open three or even sometimes contested threes, or putting his head down, Derrick Henry running to the rim, trying to get a bucket. But like you said too, man, I don't think Keldon's hit his ceiling yet. I know he's 24. I know he's held to a higher standard than other guys on this team. And there are definitely some things this season that I would like to see, improve moving forward. And I think he still has work to do. But I think there's a reason we gave him the contract he did. And I think, or we did. And I think also the fluctuation of this season whenever it comes to his role, and then also just learning to play alongside Wemby, has affected a lot. Now, obviously, like I said, there are going to be guys that down the line that I think we do eventually move. But whether that's Keldon or not, I think he is someone who has not unlocked his full potential yet. And like you kind of mentioned with the flashes earlier, that there are things that Keldon does that remind you, and in games that he has that remind you why we gave him the contract he did. And then also just show once he really puts everything together, I think he has a higher potential of a higher ceiling of what we're seeing from him right now.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah. Well, Ethan, I think we're going to have to wrap this one up because I just saw your text that you sent me and that your computer is about to die. So I don't want that to happen while we're on air. So what we can do, I think, is, do you want to go through the Rodeo Road Trip real quick since we had that? And then maybe we can save a lot of the role players for a different episode. Maybe we can even do it next live, like after we're done with the game flow or something.
Let's do that.
Cool. I know we had Victor in the comments here asking about Blake Wesley. I want to talk about my boy Dom Beasy because he actually does have enough rotation minutes to throw him into this. So I definitely want to talk about those guys in Malachi, but just to help Ethan out here, we're gonna go ahead and just go to the Rodeo Road Trip and wrap this up real quick. So I'm just going to read the games off, Ethan, and then I'll dish it to you for kind of your overall thoughts, how many games we can potentially win, and then we'll call this a day.
All right, let's do it.
Miami, we have this Wednesday. Then we have Thursday, so a little Florida trip to start. Then we go up to the East Coast. We play Brooklyn. We go across the border to Canada. We come back down to Texas to play the Mavericks. Then we go to the West Coast to play Sacramento, Los Angeles, and Utah. And then we finish it off up north in Minnie before we get home at the end of this month, Ethan. So Rodeo Road Trip, February Road Trip, whatever you want to call it. The Spurs are going to be on the road, and there are some solid teams that we're going to have to play during this stretch, Ethan. It's a tough one looking at it.
I'm going to go with the record of 3-6.
Okay.
Win 3 games. I think it'll be against Brooklyn. I think we can catch Dallas because that's a rivalry game. They'll probably rest a couple players. I think we can catch them sleeping. And then I'm going to go with the Los Angeles Lakers because is this the first time Victor Wembanyama's played against the Lakers at the Staples Center?
I don't think so. I'm pretty sure we played earlier this year because I remember seeing like a whole like thing about it. They were like Wemby's first time in Los Angeles, but maybe that was the preseason, Ethan, because I'm seeing here these 2 games against LA. They're both at home, and same with the Clippers here. Oh, I'm thinking of the Clippers game. That's what I'm thinking of. My bad.
Clippers has no clout. We're not talking about the Clippers. The Lakers.
It was the Staples Center though, so I wasn't going crazy.
We're going crazy. He's in the Staples Center, but it's a different environment when you play
It
the
is.
And the king, LeBron James. Say what you will, he is still the face of the league. So I think Wemby goes crazy in Los Angeles and is able to pull us to a victory. But those are the only 3 that I'm gonna bet on.
Hey, he's 1-0 against LeBron. He's trying to go 2-0.
Exactly.
I hope that happens, Ethan. What I see when I look at this, I know Toronto has made some moves and they've got a solid team. But the games that stick out to me as having potentially a chance to win, and we did play Orlando tough last time, but the games that stick out to me are Utah and Toronto. Those are the 2 games that I see as potentially winning. But I say that, and I feel like the Raptors have actually blown us out like every time we've played them recently. So I may have to retract that. But maybe like a Brooklyn or an Orlando, like I was saying.
That's what I keep thinking. Every time I see Toronto, I'm like, "Oh, it could be an easy win," but, like, they always kick our ass, bro.
Yeah.
Like, RJ Barrett's been playing really well too, like, he's probably gonna drop 48 on.
Quickly solid.
Yeah, they got a lot of quick guard, and they still got size. They still got my boy JP, Jakob Poeltl.
So we took them to overtime. I know last year I was actually at the game where they blew us out last year. Um, I guess I'm forgetting another one where they went crazy. That was just Scotty Barnes just going insane and winning that in overtime. Then now that I'm remembering that actually, but last year there was a home game in like March or April around then. Actually, it wouldn't be April, but like maybe March February that I went to, and they just absolutely killed us. So I don't know. We did take them to overtime, but if Scotty Barnes just like looks like Steph Curry again, I don't have much confidence.
Yeah, we don't have OG Anunoby anymore, who also killed us that night, if you remember.
That is true. But like you said, RJ's playing well, and they have Quickly to add to that. So
And to point out the Utah game that you brought up, last time we lost by 12, but they didn't have Walker Kessler. So I'm interested to see that matchup because that's like he's a great
yeah,
young center, solid defense, like the opposite of Victor Wembanyama. He can't dribble, with his right hand, let alone his left hand, but he's physical and he's got a lot of size. So we'll see how that works out.
and it'll be our first game against Brooklyn too. I think that's another one that we could maybe have a chance there. And
Lonnie,
hey, that's the Barclays Center too. So I know that's not like Madison Square Garden, but it's Wemby in New York. So maybe he can, kind of have a little bit of that LA vibe, like you were saying.
did you hear what I said?
What?
Lonnie Walker revenge game.
You know what I did just realize? This will be his first return to. They have the draft in the Barclays Center, right? Or am I
Yeah,
crazy? Yeah,
that
that's what
happened.
I was. So that'll be his first return to the place where he got drafted since. So maybe there's some sentimentalism there.
Fingers crossed.
We will hope. I think 2 to 3 games is a solid, realistic expectation for this rodeo road trip. Unfortunately, I mean, you just got like Miami, a playoff team in the East. Orlando, as much as we played them tough, they're better than us.
Yep.
Toronto, we'll see, but they're also just better than us, for being honest. Dallas, obviously. Sacramento, obviously. LA, I do really get where you're coming from there. I think he's going to play up in that game, and we'll play up in that game too, but definitely not a guaranteed win. Utah, we didn't have Walker Kessler last time. We still lost. And then, it'll be interesting to see how Jeremy handles like Laurie Markkinen in that game. I can see some rough goes happening there. We still got to guard Colin Sexton on the perimeter in that game as well. And then,
Yep.
of course, Minnesota's near the top of the West. It is a rough road trip, in the words of Gorilla here.
But we'll be there every step of the way, starting Wednesday against Miami Heat.
Yes, we will. Are you good for that post game?
I think so. Yeah. I'm good.
Cool. Well, there you go, people. That is when we will see you, is next Wednesday against the Heat. And we'll be sure to do the rest of the rotation players kind of breakdown, like Blake Wesley, Malachi Branham, Zach Collins, Dom Barlow, people like that, after we get through the game flow of that episode. So yes, you see Ethan repping, you see me repping. If you would like to rep and get some SSPN gear and support the show, be sure to go to sspn.myspreadshop.com. You can you can scan the QR code. You can click the link in the description below, or you can go to our channel description and did I take something away from you there, Ethan?
No, I was just playing with.
I know you're being a mime. It was good. Anyways, you can click the link in our description as well. There's a couple different places where you can go find our merch. So we appreciate y'all. Thanks for hanging out with us today. And if you enjoyed all the content, don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button below. If you want to stay updated with the show, go follow us on Twitter or X at SSPN on YT. We appreciate y'all. Thanks for hanging out. We'll catch y'all later.